I used to think of my marriage as the safest thing in my life, like a solid wall against every storm that came our way. We'd been together for 6 years, married for 3, and while we weren't the kind of couple to plaster every kiss or date night on social media, we were steady. He was my best friend, the person who made me laugh when I was overwhelmed, and the one who knew how to calm me down when my anxiety got the best of me. I thought I knew him better than anyone, and I thought he saw me as his partner in everything. For the most part, I believed we were happy. Little routines made me feel secure. He'd kiss my forehead every morning before he left for work, even if I was half asleep. On Sundays, we'd order takeout and binge a show, arguing over what to watch but always ending up with something we both liked. There were quirks about him I adored, like the way he sang off-key when he was in the shower, or how he could never sit through a movie without asking a million questions. To me, these were the things that defined our love. They made me feel like we had a bond that couldn't be shaken. But looking back, there were tiny cracks I ignored. Times when he'd linger on his phone and tilt the screen slightly away from me, saying it was just work. Nights when he'd come home later than usual and brush off my concern with a quick, "Traffic was bad." I dismissed these things because I trusted him, because I didn't want to seem paranoid or controlling. That trust became my blindfold, and I wore it proudly. The party came up almost out of nowhere. A co-worker of his had invited us, someone he'd mentioned a few times, but never in great detail. I thought it would be fun, a chance to dress up, meet new people, and show up as a couple. I hadn't been to many social gatherings since the pandemic slowed everything down, so I was excited. I remember carefully picking out my outfit, asking for his opinion, and noticing how distracted he seemed. He gave me a quick, absent-minded, "You look nice," without even looking up from his phone. I told myself it didn't matter, that he was just tired, but deep down, I felt a sting. When the night of the party arrived, I was buzzing with energy. We got ready, and I felt that familiar pride of standing next to him, tall, charismatic, always the kind of guy who could light up a room with his smile. As we walked in, music pulsed through the air, laughter bounced off the walls, and the place was alive with people chatting, dancing, and holding glasses of wine. I clung to his arm at first, nervous about being around so many strangers, but he quickly slipped into his element. He shook hands, made jokes, and introduced me to people he knew. I was proud, but I also started to notice that his attention was less on me and more on the room. At first, it felt normal. I mingled, tried to hold conversations, and smiled when people asked how long we'd been married. I bragged a little about him, about how hard he worked and how thoughtful he could be. But every now and then, my eyes would wander, and I'd see him standing across the room, talking to a group. And in that group was her. She wasn't someone I knew, just another guest, but something about the way he leaned in when she spoke made me uneasy. I brushed it off as me being insecure. After all, he was just talking, laughing even like he did with everyone. But my gut whispered something I didn't want to hear. As the evening went on, I tried to push it aside. I focused on conversations with a couple of women who seemed kind, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. Every time, he was still talking to her. They stood close, too close for people who had just met. His hand gestures were animated, his smile brighter than usual, and when she laughed, he laughed harder. I felt myself shrinking in that moment, suddenly aware of how invisible I felt in the crowd. I kept telling myself it was fine. He was friendly, that's all. That's who he was. But then I started noticing little things I couldn't ignore. The way he touched his hair when she spoke, the way his body angled toward her like she was the only one in the room. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they worked together, maybe they had a mutual friend, maybe I was just being oversensitive. But each excuse felt flimsier than the last. When I tried to join their conversation, he barely acknowledged me. He gave me a distracted smile, a quick hand on my shoulder, then turned back to her as if I wasn't even there. I laughed along awkwardly for a moment, then drifted away, telling myself not to make a scene. But inside, my chest tightened. I had never felt so small, so out of place next to my own husband. As the party carried on, I found myself in this strange place between denial and dread. I wanted to believe the best of him, but my instinct screamed that something was off. Every time I caught a glimpse of them together, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. And yet, I smiled, I mingled, I held my glass like everything was fine. I told myself it was just one night, that tomorrow we'd laugh about how silly the party was. But deep down, I already knew this night would change everything. At first, I told myself I was being ridiculous. He was just chatting, networking, maybe even trying to make me look good by being charming. But as the night dragged on, it became harder to convince myself. Every time I glanced his way, he was still with her. They weren't just making small talk anymore. They looked like they had known each other forever. The kind of connection where you lean closer, where your body instinctively mirrors the other person's, where you smile so wide it looks like you're lit from the inside out. That was the way he was with her, and it wasn't the way he had been with me in a long time. I tried distracting myself by speaking to other guests, but my words felt hollow, and I found myself nodding along without truly listening. My eyes kept darting around the room, always landing back on him. It wasn't just paranoia, it was plain as day. He was hooked on her. And while I stood there clutching a half-empty glass of wine, pretending to laugh at jokes I barely heard, I felt like I was fading into the background of my own life. I slipped away to the bathroom just to catch my breath. I stared at my reflection, wondering if maybe I wasn't enough anymore. My lipstick had smudged a little, and my hair wasn't sitting right, and suddenly those tiny imperfections felt enormous. I remembered how he used to look at me, like I was the most beautiful person in the room. But tonight, I could have disappeared, and he wouldn't have noticed. I splashed some water on my face and forced a smile before heading back out. I didn't want to look pathetic, and I didn't want anyone else to notice the sinking feeling in my chest. But as soon as I rejoined the crowd, there they were again, laughing, leaning in, their heads close enough that the rest of the party seemed to vanish around them. My stomach turned. I told myself I needed to pull him back, remind him that I was there, remind him that I was his wife. I walked over, trying to slip into the conversation with a polite smile. He gave me a glance, brief and almost dismissive, then turned right back to her story. I laughed at the wrong moment, trying to keep up, but it was like I had entered a world that didn't include me. After a few minutes of standing there like a third wheel, I excused myself. My heart burned with humiliation, but I refused to show it. Other people started to notice too. A friend of his made a comment when I passed by, something lighthearted like, "Looks like he's found himself a partner in crime tonight." I laughed awkwardly, but inside I wanted to scream. Everyone could see it, and that was worse than the act itself. It wasn't just that I felt betrayed. I felt humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. I tried to bury myself in conversation with another couple, but my thoughts kept circling back. I remembered the little lies he had told before, the excuses, the way he tilted his phone away from me. Suddenly, they didn't feel so small anymore. They felt like pieces of a puzzle I had refused to put together. I had trusted him so completely that I ignored every warning sign. And now, here I was, standing in a crowded room, realizing that maybe my marriage wasn't what I thought it was. I kept watching him out of the corner of my eye, and each time I saw them together, something inside me cracked a little more. It wasn't just the physical closeness, it was the way he seemed alive with her. Animated, vibrant, like he was giving her parts of himself he hadn't given me in months. The way his hand brushed against her arm casually, the way she leaned into him like it was the most natural thing in the world. These weren't just coincidences. These were choices. I thought about going up to him, pulling him aside, demanding answers right then and there. But I froze. What would I even say? Stop talking to her? It would make me look desperate, insecure, like the crazy wife. And maybe that's why I stayed quiet. I swallowed my feelings and tried to hold myself together, but inside, I was crumbling. The more I tried to distract myself, the heavier the air felt around me. The laughter, the music, the chatter, it all blurred together, like background noise in a nightmare. My mind was racing, playing out scenarios, trying to prepare for something I didn't even want to face. I told myself I'd talk to him later, when we were alone, when it would be easier to tell him how invisible he had made me feel. But part of me already knew that whatever was happening between them wasn't just innocent flirting. It was the beginning of something I couldn't control. I caught him looking at her in a way he hadn't looked at me in a long time. Not just admiration, but hunger. And the worst part was, she looked right back at him with the same intensity. I felt my throat tighten, and I turned away before the tears could form. I found myself wandering outside for air, the cool night breeze hitting my face as I tried to breathe through the ache in my chest. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that I was misreading everything, but my gut told me otherwise. My gut told me that something had shifted, that the man I had walked in with wasn't mine in the same way anymore. When I went back inside, it was more of the same. Him with her. Me pretending not to notice. Every laugh they shared was like a knife twisting deeper, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I was already being pushed out of my own marriage. By the end of the night, I didn't even recognize myself. I had walked in with my husband, full of pride, and here I was, standing in the shadows, questioning everything. The foundation I thought we had suddenly felt fragile, like it could collapse at any moment. And though I tried to smile, to hold my head high, I knew deep down that the cracks were spreading, and it was only a matter of time before everything broke. As the night stretched on, I kept hoping he would finally drift back to me, that he would realize how long I had been standing alone. I thought maybe he would take my hand, pull me into a dance, or at least give me one of those reassuring glances that said we were still in this together. But that moment never came. Instead, his attention to her grew sharper, more consuming, until it felt like the rest of us didn't exist. I lost track of time, pretending to be engaged in small talk, while my eyes followed him from across the room. I told myself I would only stay another half hour, that soon he'd be ready to go home with me, that we would laugh about how awkward I had felt. But when I turned to look for him again, he wasn't there. The spot where he had been standing was empty. My chest tightened as I scanned the room, weaving through the clusters of people, expecting to see him with another group, maybe grabbing a drink at the bar. But then I saw him. He wasn't in the middle of the room anymore. He was near the door, leaning close to her. I watched his hand brush against the small of her back, as if it belonged there. He leaned down, said something in her ear, and she laughed softly, touching his arm in return. My stomach flipped, not from nerves, but from the sickening certainty of what I was seeing. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My feet felt glued to the floor as I watched the two of them step out together, side by side, leaving the party without so much as a glance back at me. In that instant, everything inside me shattered. I had feared something was wrong all night, but seeing it unfold before my eyes was a pain I wasn't prepared for. My mind raced to find explanations. Maybe they were just stepping out for air. Maybe it was some innocent coincidence, but the intimacy of his touch, the way their bodies leaned into each other, told me the truth I didn't want to face. He hadn't just abandoned the conversation, he had abandoned me. I felt the heat rise in my face as tears threatened to spill, but I forced them back. People were still mingling, laughing, unaware that my world had just caved in. Or maybe they weren't unaware. Maybe some of them had seen what I saw. Maybe they had been watching all night, piecing it together even before I did. That thought burned almost as much as the betrayal itself, the humiliation of standing there, left behind, while my husband walked out with another woman. I wanted to chase after him, to demand an explanation, to make him look me in the eye and tell me what he was doing. But I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, paralyzed by a mix of anger and disbelief. The noise of the party dulled to a distant hum, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I stood there gripping my glass, so tightly I thought it might shatter in my hand. Eventually, whispers began to circle. A couple of people exchanged glances in my direction, pity in their eyes. One woman touched my arm gently as if to comfort me, but her kindness only deepened the ache in my chest. I didn't want their sympathy. I didn't want to be the pitiful wife left standing alone. I wanted to be anywhere else but there, yet I couldn't bring myself to leave, not right away. It felt like leaving would mean accepting what had just happened, and I wasn't ready to face it. Minutes dragged on, though they felt like hours. My mind played out the possibilities of what he was doing, where they were going, what words he was whispering to her that he hadn't whispered to me in months. Each scenario was like a fresh stab, and I couldn't stop torturing myself with them. I thought of the promises he had made, the vows we had exchanged, and how quickly he had discarded them for someone he barely knew. When I finally gathered the strength to leave, the night air hit me like a slap. I half expected to see them outside, maybe standing together under the dim streetlight, but they were gone. The parking lot was nearly empty, and his car wasn't there. That sight alone confirmed everything. He hadn't just slipped out for a cigarette or a breath of fresh air. He had left, and he hadn't taken me with him. I stood there for a long time, staring at the space where his car should have been, the cold seeping into my bones. I wanted to scream, to cry, to crumble, but instead I just stood silently, gripping my coat around me like it was the only thing holding me together. It felt surreal, like I had stepped outside of my own life and was watching someone else's tragedy unfold. When I finally got into my own car, the silence was unbearable. I turned the key, but I didn't drive right away. I sat there staring at the steering wheel, my hands shaking. The reality of it pressed down on me until I couldn't breathe. My husband, the man I trusted more than anyone, the man I had built a life with, had just walked out of a party with another woman right in front of me. There was no excuse, no explanation that could erase the image seared into my mind. Driving home alone was one of the longest, emptiest drives of my life. Every mile I covered, my thoughts spiraled deeper into despair. How long had this been building? Was this the first time, or just the first time I had caught him? Did he even think about me when he walked out, or was I already forgotten the moment his hand found hers? By the time I pulled into the driveway, my tears had finally broken free, streaming down my face uncontrollably. I sat in the dark car for what felt like forever, unable to bring myself to go inside. Our house no longer felt like home. It felt like a place that had betrayed me, just like he had. Every memory, every piece of furniture, every photo on the wall felt tainted, like evidence of a love that no longer existed. When I finally stepped inside, the silence was crushing. His absence was louder than any argument could have been. I dropped my purse on the counter, collapsed onto the couch, and let myself sob until there was nothing left. The betrayal wasn't just about that night. It was about every time I had trusted him, every time I had defended him in my head, every moment I had dismissed my own intuition. He hadn't just left with another girl. He had left me standing in the ruins of everything I thought we were. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark living room, staring at nothing. Every second felt heavy, like the house itself knew what had just happened and was suffocating me with the silence. When the sound of his car finally pulled into the driveway, my stomach dropped. A part of me hoped he wouldn't come inside, that he would disappear forever and I'd never have to hear his excuses. Another part of me wanted him to walk through the door, so I could demand answers, force him to admit what he had done. He stumbled in, smelling faintly of alcohol, and something that wasn't his cologne. He looked startled to see me awake, almost annoyed, as though I had interrupted his plan of slipping back unnoticed. He muttered something about giving a friend a ride, his words casual, like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. He wouldn't meet my eyes, and that told me more than his words ever could. I asked him directly where he had gone, who she was, why he had left without a word. He paused, fumbled for explanations that didn't fit together, and when I pressed harder, he got defensive. He said I was overreacting, that I was imagining things, that he was just being social. But the image of his hand on her back and the way they slipped out together was burned into me. His denial felt like another betrayal layered on top of the first. The more he spoke, the less I recognized him. His tone was dismissive, cold, as if my pain was an inconvenience he didn't want to deal with. I realized then that the man standing in front of me wasn't the husband I thought I knew. Maybe that man had been gone for a while, and I was only just seeing it clearly for the first time. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake replaying everything from the past few months, piecing together the small red flags I had brushed aside. The late nights, the guarded phone, the distance I had felt but couldn't explain, all of it suddenly made sense. I hated myself for not trusting my gut, for letting him convince me that I was paranoid whenever I questioned him. I had been so eager to believe in us that I ignored the cracks until they split wide open. Morning came, and with it a new clarity. I looked at him sleeping beside me, and instead of love, I felt nothing but emptiness. The sight of him no longer brought comfort. It was like staring at a stranger. I realized I didn't want to spend another day pretending everything was fine. I deserved better than to be treated as invisible, better than to be left behind without a second thought. I didn't shout or cry when I told him. My voice was steady in a way I didn't expect. I told him I couldn't keep living like this, that trust once broken couldn't be glued back together by excuses. He tried to argue, tried to downplay what had happened, but his words bounced off me. Something inside me had hardened. I was done carrying the weight of a marriage he had already abandoned in his heart. After he left for work, I opened my laptop and wrote everything down. Not because I wanted to humiliate him, but because I needed to let it out. I posted my story online, not sure what kind of response I would get. Within hours, strangers flooded the comments, offering sympathy, sharing their own experiences, reminding me that I wasn't crazy and I wasn't alone. Their validation gave me a strength I hadn't felt in months. For so long, I had doubted myself. I had convinced myself that his neglect was my fault, that if I were prettier, more interesting, more attentive, maybe he wouldn't have drifted away. But reading those comments, I saw the truth laid bare. His choices were his own. His betrayal had nothing to do with my worth and everything to do with his lack of integrity. That realization was freeing. The pain was still there, raw and sharp, but for the first time, I could see a path forward. I began imagining a life without him, a life where I could reclaim my time, my energy, my joy. A life where I didn't have to scan rooms for his attention or fight for scraps of affection. I thought about the girl he had left with, and for once, I didn't feel anger toward her. If she wanted a man who could abandon his wife so easily, then she was welcome to him. She wasn't stealing anything from me. He had given himself away freely. And if he could do that to me, he would do it to her too, eventually. That wasn't my burden to carry anymore. The days that followed were hard. There were moments when I broke down, when the loneliness was crushing and the silence of the house felt unbearable. But each day, the weight lifted just a little. Each morning, I woke up with a little more strength to stand on my own. I started making small changes, moving his things out of sight, reaching out to friends I hadn't spoken to in months, reclaiming pieces of myself I had let slip away. Healing wasn't instant, but it was steady. And in the process, I began to rediscover who I was before the betrayal and who I could be after it. Stronger, wiser, unwilling to settle for less than the respect I deserved. Looking back now, that night at the party wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of my awakening. I saw the truth with my own eyes, and as painful as it was, it freed me from living in denial. Love shouldn't make you feel invisible. A partner shouldn't leave you questioning your worth. I had spent too much time believing I wasn't enough, when the reality was, he wasn't enough for me. The betrayal broke me, but it also pushed me toward something better, toward a future where I am no longer waiting to be chosen, because I choose myself. And that, more than anything, is the lesson I carry forward.